Well, good afternoon. We hit the 2 o'clock hour and appreciate seeing you all this afternoon. We've got a lot of data to cover today. We're going to explore the entire Fundraising Effectiveness Project report for the year 2024. It's titled the Q4 report because these reports are done quarterly, but this will pick up all the activity from January 1st to December 31st last year. We'll wait just another minute to see how folks come in. We got a few more on the list I know that are anticipating joining. And in the meanwhile, let me introduce myself for those who don't know. My name is Scott Lang. I'm the founder and president of Visionary Philanthropic Consulting. Um, Originally from Ohio and moved down here to Naples, Florida in 2020, and I'm sporting a little bit of a tan, actually a burn, because of the weekend we went to Nassau to listen to the John Legend concert, and I spent a little too much time out in the sun without a hat. So, lesson learned, I should know better. I'm going to share my screen and make things a bit larger for you. Get to the slideshow element here. There we go. And hang on just a second. Let me bring that back. And we're off. So, as I said, today's conversation is relative to the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. This is a joint project between the AFP Foundation and Giving Tuesday. The overarching news for the year is essentially encapsulated by the following terminology. Um, Same results, different day. The anticipation predicated on the data set that we reviewed, there was a decrease in number of donors, slight increase in the number of dollars. However, that's an adjustment that we made predicated, or FEP made predicated on anticipation of late arriving data. And then the retention of donors that declined by 2.6%. Again, this is year over year. The current data set, and for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, which started in 2009, is essentially based on actual gift transactions submitted by the data providers themselves. So it's anonymized in so much as the constituent ID numbers that are provided to FEP are changed from what's in a client system. They're randomly assigned, but they're consistent. So the same individual shows up year after year. Over 6 million, close to 7 million donors, over $10 billion, and over 12,000, close to 12 and a half nonprofit organizations. Um, we're looking at organizations who've raised at least $5,000 over the course of the year. They have to have several years of data in order to be statistically relevant. And because of the type of work we're looking at, we exclude gifts that are in excess of $10 million. Now, on the donor side, over time, you can see between 2020 and 2024, uh, there's been in the last 4 years an annual decline in the number of donors. The one anomaly was 2020 when our hearts were broken by COVID and people were suffering. There was a tremendous outpouring of support, both in terms of number of people who gave to those who might have been without employment, or suffering in terms of housing, shelter, food, etc., and those that still had capacity. What's interesting to note is that in the last 3 years, the number of donors has declined in the last quarter, October, November, and December. And as a statistician, I find this kind of interesting because classically, I think of the academic calendar as being the fact that take the sluggish months of June, July, and August, when I lived in DC area, everything shut down in August. There was nothing going on. You get into September, donations start to ramp up again. But in this case, both in 2024 and in 2023, 2022, the number of donors declined. They increased last year. Now, definition of terms. When we look at retention for FEP, a new donor to an organization is someone who's never given before, totally brand new, never seen them. A newly retained donor was someone who was a new donor last year. So in 2023, we captured them. They retained in 2024. Now, repeated retained donors might have given some time in the past, but their gift in 2023 was not their first. And then a recaptured donor is someone who did not give the previous year, but gave some time in the past. So if you think of the old adage, lie bunt, last year but not this year, and cy bunt, some years but not this year, a recaptured donor would be a cy bunt. And I just want you to recognize that because this is the nomenclature we're going to be using. When you break down the donors by the size of the gift, what we tend to see is that the larger the gift, then the more they're inclined to stay with us. So if we look at the major and supersized areas, we had a positive impact on the market. They grew by 0.9% and over 2.5%. But when you look at the low end of the list, you see the micro donors, people who gave less than $100, declined at the largest rate, 8.8%, nearly 9%. Now, why is this significant? Because it's the micro donor that provides 50% of all the donations, all the donors in the universe in 2024. The small donors, those between 101 and 500, represent 30% of that total. I got to turn the little pen off here and then I can advance the slide again. So because I think visually, I broke this down to a pie chart, and this shows you how this broke out. So the microdonor, 50% of the equation, nearly 51. Those at the upper end of the gift scale, in excess of $5,000, gave just over 3%. 15% of the money came in that 501 to $5,000 level, and then 30% at the 100 to 500. Now, life cycle is key. One of the issues for us is to look at this in terms of the change year over year. So when we look at new donors, we had a decline year over year change of 7%. Newly retained donors, 8% decline, repeat retained donors, almost a 5% decline, and recaptured 4.4%. And the overall decline in donor numbers is primarily driven by a decline in or decrease in new donor engagement. Um, these are the ones who make up nearly 40% of all donors in 2024. So it's significant relative to what transpired last year. Now, another variable that we look at is the number of donations that one is given over time. And so the person who's only made one donation composed almost 70% of the donor database, one-time donors. You look at those who give several times over the course of the year, two or more donations. That went down by six. Those that give the 3 to 6 donations during the course of the year, that declined by seven. Those that gave over seven declined by three. So people who make more donations over the course of the year, the loss decreased. So there was a slowing of the rate of decline. The biggest one was at the front end. These people who only made one donation. And again, this is a graphic illustration of the same chart. Taking a look at dollars. What happened on the dollar side of the equation? When you look at dollars, again, this chart shows us that in 2020, we had a significant increase in dollars that equated with the significant increase we saw with donors. And then you see that there was a slight increase in 2021 and then a decrease in 2022, um, negligible 2023 in our data set. You'll recall that last year's Giving USA report showed that while there was an increase in dollars in terms of current value, when you adjust for inflation, we actually had a loss. And then right now we're showing an even core, but there's an estimate that some of the clients that throw their data in late, uh, we could see, as we have in the past, an increase. That increase could be as much as 3%, 3.5%. And again, looking at the transfer of dollars over time and the change year over year, we look at this last quarter and we see the same kind of decline in dollar giving. And this is unusual to me. Um, I sort of understand January and the peak in 2023. I used to work at a law school and I waited until the bonuses were distributed. That happened to the first of the year, and so attorneys would tend to make their gift, first thing in January. Accounting firms and some others were the same. Now, dollars by size, here's where we had, a corollary experience as we did with donors. We had a decline in the number of micro donors, less than 100, over the previous year. And we had a significant decrease in the small gifts, $100 to 500. Now, for those of you who are students of the Pareto principle and the 80/20 rule, you'll notice that on this chart, what FEP is showing is that while there was a almost 9% year over year negative change in the number of gifts at this level, they only represented 1.6% of the total dollars given. So less than 2% of the dollars coming from over 50% of the donors. And then we absolutely see the real growth in the issue predicated at the supersize, where we had a positive 5% change, and that represented 52.5% of all the dollars given this past year. I gotta get rid of my highlighter again. There we go. So when we look at it graphically, this illustrates the point, the inverse of what we saw in the previous pie chart. The gifts in excess of $50,000, 52% of the total. Gifts between $1 and 100, 1.6%. Almost 5% of the donations coming from those who are giving $100 or more, and then 16% from that $500 level, and then 25% in excess of 5,000. Rather significant, and leads to the mental equation that if you can get someone giving $1,000 or more to the institution, And if you can get them to make those gifts repeatedly over the course of the year, you get them into a recurring gift program, then in fact, you're going to have a better chance of keeping them in the stable. That we see this here. So we look at donors by dollars by life cycle. We had a negative 2.5% change in the new donors, declined. That was our largest shift. The newly retained donors, in other words, the person that we captured last year, newly acquired, they gave again in 2024, that actually went up. So maybe we're doing a couple things right here. And the repeat retained donors, in terms of dollars, went up. So we are doing a better job of getting people who have given in the past. I think this illustrates to give a little more. And that repeated retained donors, as you see, represents 60% of the total. The recaptured donors, interestingly enough, those people that had given some time ago and then came back in 2024, that declined by nearly 2%. So an interesting diagram here because it's not a unilateral shift going from left to right in terms of the largest declination to new donors tapering off to recaptured. Um, by donation count, this again is interesting, where a 0.8% drop in the people who made one donation, 3.5% drop in the people who made two donations during the course of the year, or the those that made more than two, 3 to 6, we actually increased, and we increased again at the level of 7 plus. So um, this is interesting because the more engaged the donor, the more money comes in. Um, that's a significant life lesson for us in the business. And again, this just shows graphically it, and this is my iteration to be able to illustrate the percentage of dollars that came from those who made one gift, two gifts, three gifts, or seven or more. Now, I tied the two trend lines together here to illustrate the rate of decline from 2020 to 2024. The blue line represents the number of donors and the drop in donors that we've seen. The green line represents the drop in dollars. And so if you did a trend analysis in both cases, you would see a line sloping from high left to low right. If you were to extend this out ad infinitum, and I think this is the point of Nathan Chappelle's book about the generosity crisis, you could see yourself in a situation where perhaps we end up with all the money coming from 5 people, right? And that's what we want to avoid in our business. We'd like to get more people giving, see more generosity rather than less. So the last element that FEP examines is this issue of retention. And when we look at retention over time, uh, 2.9 decline in 2020, 4.2% decline in 2021, 4.1 in 2022, zero point 0.6 in 2023, and almost 3.5, 3.6 decline in terms of donor retention. And our retention rate for this year was 42.9%. I think when I first joined the FEP board, I rotated off just this year, but when I joined 3 years ago, I believe the retention rate was 45.5%. So over time, we're seeing a declination, continual declination in the total number of donors, people participating in the charity game in the country. And again, this is a longitudinal view of the last 3 years relative to the rate of retention, change in the retention rate by month. Now, the new donor retention rate, those people that gave again last year to this year, declined almost by 6%. The repeat donor retention rate declined by 3%. Now, the recapture rate is not calibrated here because we're undergoing a methodological review at FEP, and this will come back online, I believe, in the next quarter's report. When you look at retention by size, we see in a almost an equivalent drop across the board. Retention at the low level -4, retention at the $100 level -5, retention at mid-size nearly -4, 3.8, major 3.2, supersize a decline of 3.7%. Now, these at the upper end are more in line with one another. I mean, these are in the threes, whereas the others are larger. So we're doing a better job of not losing as many people at as rapid a pace at the larger gift size than we are at the lower, but still it represents an issue, a problem. And when we look at it by donor count, we even see that historically there's a correlation between retention and donor count, and it remains strong, but still, um, it's a little higher at 3 to 6 donations and 7 donations year over year. Um, but the numbers retained. The actual donors retained at 86.8% at the high level is good. At 70% at the 3 to 6 donations a year is good. Um, so the concern is what can we do down here at the low end to move things up. So the next slide we're going to look at is relative to gifts to organizations. And FEP calibrates two numbers, one being the mean, one being the median. So the mean and the median, average and midpoint is the difference between the two of those. And when you look at organizations of a small size, less than 100,000, they had a 2.2% growth in dollars. Those at or represent 2.2% of the total, 100,000 to 250,000, 5.2%. But you look at the rate of change, the largest growth area was for those smaller organizations year over year. Those that had an impact in terms of negative amounts of money in the till were those in excess of $5 million. So they represented 41% of the total dollars, but year over year, they lost nearly 5%. And when you look at that from the median standpoint, 2.4. Kind of interesting to see. I don't know if we can make assumptions here, but it could be that the smaller the organization, if you expand the number of donors and the number of dollars, it's more significant statistically than a larger organization. But what's also true is that there may be donors who feel they have some real impact at some of those mid-sized organizations as well. Now, if you looked at a pie chart from Giving USA, you would see typically, historically, that religion captured more than 50% of the total. Last year was the first year it was less than 30% of the total, less than a third. But, and then closely followed by education, healthcare, and human services. Those three sort of battle it out for second, third, and fourth place. What's interesting here is that human services has the highest percentage of donations, education comes in second. And then all those bulk together that aren't in any one of the other categories, unknown, um, came in at 12.3% of the total. Now, I'll have to admit that of all the donor providers that submit data to the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, Blackbaud is not one. And Blackbaud probably has one of the largest, more significant footprints in the market and probably covers more of the education and healthcare space than any of the other data providers. So if their data sets were included, these bar charts might be skewed differently. That said, what we're seeing with the data that was provided to us was that there were losses in terms of dollars year over year, in uh, the arts, culture, and humanities. They experienced the largest year-over-year decline in dollars raised, um, and others had different experiences. Now, I'm going to do a pitch here. The Fundraising Effectiveness Project is designed to give us information from which we can better view what is actually happening at the transactional basis and allow us to make better informed decisions. So, what the organization tries to do is ensure that there's statistical normality across the information that's provided. And we ensure that the organizations that are included have enough years in order to be able to participate in this. And there's a link here. This slide deck will be available to you to be able to pull up some more information about the methodology that's utilized. But I have to thank all the organizations that provide data, Donor Perfect, Bloomerang, Bonterra, Neon One, GiveSmart, GiveButter, QGive, etc. All of this information helps feed the data that we're looking at today. And um, Amazon's Web Services provides the data structure from which we're able to get this information. So what I wanted to do at this point was shift over to Q&A and make sure that anyone in the audience had an opportunity to ask a question. And I'll be honest and tell you that if you don't, I've got some. Um, and so if you want to type something in, uh, please feel free to enter something in the chat or the Q&A. Well, I'm going to bring something to the table. And if we want to sit back and think, what we want to do is start to challenge this decline. I'm on a missionary zeal quest here that we as professional fundraisers, consultants, development professionals have got to turn this around. I would like to see next year a report that shows zero decline and 2 years after that, an increase of 2 to 3%. So, what can we do to start improving and retaining and stewarding donors? When we've gotten involved in recurring gift programs, what we like is the built-in capacity to start stewarding donors with impact reports, telling them exactly how their gifts were used, what they were used for. Um, and somebody's telling me the chat's disabled. Hang on a second. Let me get in here. That ought not to be the case. Da, da, chat. Yeah, I may be technologically challenged and can't make a change here. Well, I think Q&A is up if you want to ask a question. Um, the other thing we can do, or you can send me a text message. If you send me a text at 201 406 6035, I'll respond to that. And I'm putting that in the chat right now. The A number of organizations that I've talked to have begun introducing a thing called a welcome package. So someone's a new donor, they immediately rush to them a series of uh, videos, um, slide decks, impact reports, an annual report, so they can see exactly, how and where their money is being used. And then some interesting things about how to recapture previous donors. We had a session yesterday at the local AFP chapter where folks were talking about how they actually just got on the phone and called people and said, we miss you and would you come back? And in fact, they did. And then in terms of improving our ability to acquire new donors, one of the women in attendance at the program indicated that she simply asked people if they wouldn't mind inviting a friend of theirs to an event and ask them to make a gift. Um, so what I'm interested in seeing are those things that we can do to actively engage our board members to get involved in the game, one of stewarding donors, and B, stepping alongside you to introduce you to people that they know that could become donors at their level. Um, the question that just came up is how does new technology play a, a part in the giving trends? I'm not too sure how to interpret that because what I'm seeing um, is there are two impacts. One, if we went back to that slide that looked at donations during the month, there are a number of organizations that participate in giving days in April and May, and that's part of the spike. So one could say that the peer-to-peer fundraising, things that go on that way, tend to capture people. I think primarily a lot of the technology relative to let's say a GoFundMe type equation acquires the new donor, the one-time donor, the one donation, uh, oftentimes $100 or less, 75, 50, 25, et cetera. What we want to do is see technology help with recurring donations. If we get the number of donations a year up, we see that that increases stickiness, increases retention. So the reality of that is the best way to do it is through a credit card, or in Europe in the EU, because credit cards expire and the nonprofits don't want to deal with having to recapture a new credit card number, expiration date, CSV number, etc. They try to do a direct ACH withdrawal from someone's bank account. But that credit card technology has been a while. Um, some of the newer technology relative to the AI things that are out there have helped identify people who gave, let's say, last June. It's now May, and they'll push a reminder to the development officer to either send them an email, give them a phone call, send them a text, and ask if they'd be inclined to come and join us. Um, Someone reminded me the description of the webinar said there'd also be a discussion about alternative forms of benevolence. Actually, last minute we decided to make a change. We're going to do that next month when we talk about the Giving USA report. I happen to serve on the editorial review board, and we'll be doing that in June. Um, and if you attended our session last year, it's important to note that the amount of money that goes through GoFundMe or some kind of a social media campaign that literally helps your neighbor. You know, I'm living down here in Florida. After Hurricane Ian or Hurricane Milton, someone's roof blew off, they need help. I make a $200 donation. It's to my neighbor. My neighbor is not registered with the IRS as a charitable organization, a 501(c)(3), so that doesn't count. Also, people are dropping money into social impact investment funds. And what my colleague Jason Blumenthal discovered was that there's over $1.1 trillion, trillion with a T, invested in those impact funds. If just 10% of that had gone to charity, we would have had a banner in 2023, and we did not. So I think there is a um, confluence or a blending of what you and I might describe as generosity relative to someone's response to hurting, and benevolence, which is typically defined as a gift to charity, to a nonprofit organization. And I think that's part of the mix. Um, the other thing that's part of the mix is increase in competition. Every year we record a number of new nonprofits that have been created. And in fact, I think there was a survey done by millennials and Gen Xers in particular, um, who cited as an aspiration the idea of creating their own charity, which means they're dissatisfied with the existing charities, or it means that we haven't given them enough information about what the existing charities do that would encourage them to invest in one of those that are already on the table. But good questions. Um, the Here's another question. Here's a question. You mentioned that using impact rewards to show donors exactly how their gifts were used. What are some of the specific examples or formats you've seen work really well that are personal, inspiring rather than transactional? Probably the best illustration I can think of two illustrations. The first one, we're working with the Women's Foundation here, and one of the initiatives is to address the problem of elderly women, senior women, we'll call that 65 plus, who are homeless. And in a county that's as affluent, in a city that's as affluent as Naples, this came as a shock that you would have upwards of 70 people basically living in the street or living in a car or whatever. And we tackled that issue and raised over $1 million for three pillars. I think it was senior women and homelessness, isolation, who needed some kind of social service, and then also mentoring younger women and giving younger women an opportunity uh, for what I would call non-traditional scholarship support. So not just money to go to college or trade school, community college, but also the dollars needed to put their child in um, some kind of daycare and provide dollars for transportation and provide dollars for books. At the annual meeting, they had a video done of one of the women who told a story about how she moved down here at her daughter's invitation. And she moved in with her daughter. And then after 2 years, I think circumstances with her daughter changed. The daughter picked up a job in some other area and she moved away. And for reasons not explained, did not bring her mom. Mom couldn't afford the apartment. Mom ended up on the street. The only way she got help was through the dollars that were provided by the women that donated to the Women's Foundation and gave that to one of the local organizations that provides shelter and service. The way the story was told and the way she described her situation literally brought a tear to everyone in the room. Now, that was done for an event, but that video clip in response to your question, Lena, was captured and then reissued and reused. And I think the degree to which we can do that kind of thing, take little snippets, little stories of simply the child who said, "Hey, listen, without this scholarship, I wouldn't have been able to accomplish the things I've accomplished." Um, when I was at Roanoke College and realized that 32 families gave 85% of the money, and those families back in the day were giving in excess of, I think it was $1,000 a year or more. I turned to the president and I said, "Would you be willing to make a phone call to each one of these people, whatever your top level gift club is?" And I did the math and I said 35 divided by 12. I mean, we're not talking a substantial number of phone calls per day, maybe just a couple a month. But when a gift came in, I'd photocopy the $10,000 check. I'd put a note on it and would say, this came from so and so, and I would put it on the president's desk. He was able to come back from a meeting, pick up the phone and say, "Listen, uh, John and Jennifer, I was just in a meeting over at the library, saw your check on my desk, and I want to thank you because it reinforces everything we're doing to bring top level scholars here to interact with our faculty and support our programs. And without your generosity, we wouldn't be able to do that." So the little things, um, or the number of people that you were able to get off the street, or the number of meals you were able to serve, doing that on a routine basis. We're working with a food bank um, near Tampa, and the chart on the wall showing the number of families that needed service in 2020 versus those in 2025 is significant. It's more than doubled in that 5 year period of time, and it just makes the need for more food being distributed that much more apparent. And so you push that out in an email, in a text message, on your website. And it's got to be built into the routine. I do believe. Um, got a comment here. Philanthropy appears to be evolving and not for the better. It seems that approximately 95% of total money contributed is coming from 5% of the donor base. This recalibration of giving is considerable and considerably greater than the increasing retention or renewal rates. How do we, as a philanthropic professionals, begin to make an impact on increasing donor participation? Great question. That, in fact, is the mission. And I've been around long enough, um, and I say that with a certain amount of pride. I'm not sick. I'm not infirmed. I don't have dementia. Um, but back in the day, we in college fundraising used to recruit students to do phonathons and call alumni. And we would take several weeks out of the year and we would have incentive programs. We'd pit one dorm against another, one fraternity against another, one team against another. The folks involved in the choir, whatever. We get all these organizations involved, and they could win prizes. And if they made X number of calls at night, they'd get a free phone call to their family. That's when long distance calls were expensive, not, before. I'm dating myself here, before the day and age of the cell phone. But the reality was these students were serving as volunteers. And then someone came along and said, if I actually paid these kids and gave them a script and went through training, we could raise more money because it would be more businesslike. They would be more efficient. There's a reward for the work they're doing. And in fact, that happened. The paid students outpaced the volunteers. My concern at the time, and Scott Nichols and I and Nelson Cover would have these conversations at case conferences relative to my position that we were doing ourselves harm. That in fact, our role as educators was to provide an opportunity for people to experience volunteering and charity. When my son was in high school, there was a requirement to do community service work. Well, excuse me, but once you require community service, it's no longer volunteering. So right here, we have a volunteer day, an effort to clean up the beach, and we'll recruit people from the community to go out to the Gulf and actually help pick up the trash or whatever that's left on the seashore by people who aren't as considerate of the environment as others. True volunteerism and the kind of thing that you see at Habitat for Humanity, where folks come out and help build a house and aren't paid for it. It's significant. And I think one of the messages we have to send is the value of volunteering, the and donating. In fact, it was the Lilly School of Philanthropy did a study. I think it was maybe 3 years ago now, but they were comparing the way women and men felt after making a donation. And women giving gave women more satisfaction than did men who gave. Couples who gave to charity had a more satisfactory personal life than either women or men alone. And there have been studies done in the um, in the healthcare practice that feelings of gratitude, generosity, and actual making donations in support of research activities in the area where you're experiencing, a disease problem or orthopedic, a fracture, whatever, actually helps in the rehabilitation process. Um, kind of the old phrase, laughter is the best medicine. So these are all things that I think we can do, but I need us to think outside the box. These three things. If we focus on what can we do to retain and steward our donors, and we did a survey, we meaning AFP Foundation. I think this goes back maybe 5 years now. They asked the question, how many of you send out a thank you letter? Unfortunately, unfortunately, 55% of the organizations that responded said no. All they do is send out a receipt, and the receipt they send is the one that's required by the IRS, which starts at the $250 level. That ain't stewardship. If you distinguish yourself by being the nonprofit that not only sends a letter, but sends a handwritten note, calls and remembers somebody on their birthday or their anniversary, or calls to say, hey, listen, I'm in your neighborhood, love to get together with you for coffee. Can I drop by an impact report and show you how many people, how many meals we served, how many puppies we saved last year or in the last quarter? Those are things that will distinguish you from others. I've got an anecdotal story of a member of our practice who, as a director of development, actually made a call on a donor drove from one state to another because she heard he was sick and want to check in. That's the kind of attention that distinguishes you from others. How can we improve recapturing the previous donors? What can we do to make it acceptable to come back and ensure that the thing that they said interested them 3 years ago is still on their radar screen? And here's how we're impacting lives today. And then how can we acquire new donors? How can we get more people aware of what we do, aware of the value of what they give, and how that money is applied. Um, these are all elements of our daily work, and we've got to address these. And I'd love to get in conversation with any one of you that would like to explore this in greater detail. I've got a QR code up on the screen if you want to learn more about the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. Just scan this with your phone. It'll take you to the FEP reports site. I want to let you know that there's a thing that the Effectiveness Project also does, and that is it's called a fitness test. We'll take the same data that's used by FEP, constituent ID number, date of the gift, amount of the gift, run it through a process that'll spit out a report and show you what your retention rate is, your acquisition rate, what your recapture rate is, and it'll do that for each of the last 6 years. It's very valuable. It'll break it out by size, by the number of donors, the same kind of thing we did right here. And again, if you'd like help with that, I'm happy to help. It's anyone who's a member of AFP can get this free of charge. So I would encourage you to do that. And if you'd like to come to our website, in a day or two, we should have a copy of this recording up there as well. And you'll be able to download it as well as other seminars that were done by Dan Freeman or Michael Shipham or Jason Blumenthal, Lynn Coughlin, Melanie Sablehouse, Ava Barksdale, etc. So please check that out. We'd be delighted to help you in any way we can and explore these in more detail. Really appreciate your time this afternoon. It's a short week. You gave an hour to us, so I'd like to say thank you, and I'd like to make myself available to you anytime you need the assistance. And with that, I will stop sharing the screen and say thank you and wish you all a healthy and happy week. Take care. Bye-bye.